Alien abduction stories have been around for a very long time. They exploded in the 1950s and onward, bringing us incredible stories of supposed encounters with extraterrestrial beings not of this world. While a lot of these stories can be dismissed easily, some tend to be more believable, whether it be due to evidence or a group of eyewitness testimonies. There are times these stories cannot just be ignored, and maybe, just maybe, something is in fact going on. Today, we're going to be talking about the Allagash Abduction case. This is considered to be one of the most interesting alien abduction stories to date. So sit back, grab a coffee, and let your mind sink into the incredible, to the unbelievable, and to the unknown. Our story starts off on a cool August night in 1976 in Allagash, Maine. Four friends, all in their 20s, consisting of Jim and Jack Weiner, Charles Fultz, and Charles Rack. These four men decided to pass the time by going camping in the woods. Their camping trip started like any other. Everything seemed normal. While the group of men were no expert survivalists, they knew their way around the outdoors and knew exactly what they were doing. During the second night, they saw a big ball of light in the sky. It stayed in the sky for a good while before disappearing. While the group was taken back at the big light, it didn't really bother them too much, so they continued with their camping. It wasn't until the third night when things began to get weird. Running low on food and not wanting to cut their trip short, they decided to go fishing at night. Night fishing is considered somewhat dangerous, since without much visibility you can easily float off farther than you wanted to. The group knew this, however, and of course created a fire back on the lake as a marker, so that way they knew where their campsite was at all times. After a little while of fishing, the group of men noticed a big bright light in the sky. This was much brighter than any other star in the sky that night, and seemed just to be a few hundred meters away, floating above the trees. The men stared at it, trying to figure out what it was exactly that they were looking at. The light began to change colors, first red, then green, then yellow. It was after this that Charlie Fultz decided to signal the craft with his flashlight. This had no effect on the ship, that is, until a few minutes later. To their horror, the ship began to move closer to them. The men, in a panic, started to paddle back to shore as fast as they possibly could. About halfway back to shore, a bright beam that was emitted from the craft engulfed the canoe in a white light. The next thing they knew, they were back on the bank of the lake. The light was still in the sky, and Charlie again decided to shine his flashlight at it. Except this time, the craft took off at an incredible speed. The fire that they had started had already burned out, which would have taken at least a few hours. They had no idea what happened to them, or their missing hours from their night. After the incident, the men packed up and headed back home. It wasn't long, however, before the events of that night started having effects on the men. Jack Weiner began having nightmares of himself being experimented on, while the group of friends sat on a bench next to him, unable to help. He described the aliens as having large necks and long heads. Their eyes were metallic and glowing with no eyelids. Their hands only had 4 fingers and resembled the hands of an insect. It wasn't long before the rest of the men started having dreams of the same nature, and they had to go to a therapist. Whenever they got to the therapist, they underwent a procedure called regressive hypnosis. With this treatment, they would remember all the things they had forgotten. They all remembered being abducted and having each one of them tested on. They had bodily fluids taken out of them, like semen and urine, and also claimed to have many other humiliating tests done on them. The thing about the group story is that it all seemed to add up. Even when interviewed separately, the story always made sense logically. There was no holes in the story whatsoever. They all even passed lie detector tests with flying colors. Since all the men were actually artists, they managed to draw out what they saw on the ship while they were there, and those pictures are terrifying. So this was the story of the Allagash abductions. It's up to you if you want to believe it or not, but you can't deny the fact that some of these stories are hard to dismiss right away. If alien life does exist close enough to the Earth for them to visit, then they most likely have had millions of more years to develop than we have. They could be visiting us to understand just how a developing civilization works, or maybe, just maybe, they're here for something a little bit more sinister. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Be sure to hit that sub button if you haven't already, as well as that bell icon so you won't miss any of my future videos. This has been Horror Theater. Have a good night, and stay safe out there.